Welcome to Cerebral Faith Live if you're watching this on YouTube, and welcome to the Cerebral Faith Podcast if you're listening to the audio version of this program on Stitcher or Spotify or somewhere else. This is going to be the last episode of Cerebral Faith Live / the Cerebral Faith Podcast for the year, because as I said several times on this program already, this is going to be a seasonal thing. It's going to be it's basically going to be a summer program, and it would have already ended, but I had to cancel for 2 weeks because I got COVID. And I got to apologize because this was supposed to be streamed earlier, and I lost track of the time. That is the first time I had ever lost track of the time when I was supposed to show up to have a guest on the program. First time for everything. But I've apologized to everyone profusely, everyone at the RTB staff and Dr. Ross, and we're doing this thing, so that's good. But yeah, today I am having Dr. Hugh Ross of Reasons to Believe on the program. If you don't know who he is, Dr. Ross is he founded this organization called Reasons to Believe, and they are dedicated to showing the harmony between science and the Bible, and not just simply that you can affirm modern scientific discoveries and you can believe in science and also believe the Bible, but they go a step further, and they show that there are actually good reasons from science to believe that God exists, hence the name Reasons to Believe. And I have benefited very much from the writings of Dr. Hugh Ross, Fuzz Rana, Ken Samples. I remember being a 19-year-old, and I had I believe it was the 3rd edition of The Creator and the Cosmos that I had gotten at the National Conference on Christian Apologetics, and just being enthralled at all this, Big Bang cosmology and fine-tuning stuff, and just being floored at discovering just how improbable it was that some of these constants and quantities, which we will be talking about tonight, that they should be just right for life. I read that book too many times and it fell apart. So, but now I have the 4th edition in digital. So I think that's enough intro stuff. With that out of the way, say hello to Dr. Hugh Ross, and Dr. Hugh Ross, say hello to the audience.
Hello.
So, Dr. Ross, as I said, I read a book where you talked about the fine-tuning of the universe and the fine-tuning of our, local area, the Creator and the Cosmos. You've written several books on this topic. Improbable Planet is one of them. You go a little bit into this and why the universe is the way it is. How would you say that this book, which is called Designed to the Core, how does this differ from previous materials you have put out?
Well, I've written 5 books on the evidence from the universe that it's fine-tuned to make possible the existence of humans here on Earth. What's different about Design to the Core is that it's focusing on what kind of design do we need in the universe, our galaxy, our local arm, local bubble, local fluff, our solar system, interior structures of the Earth, Moon, and different planets to make possible the redemption of billions of human beings from their sin and evil. I mean, it tells us in the Bible that God began his works of redemption before he created anything. So what I wanted to do in Design to the Core is show that indeed every component of the universe and every event in the history of the universe has been fine-tuned, has been designed to make possible the redemption of billions of human beings from their sin and evil.
So, yeah, it's been a while since I've talked about the fine-tuning on this podcast, and I plan on next year having a whole series of presentations on different arguments for God's existence, the reliability of the New Testament, the minimal facts argument, and so on. Just basically a long crash course in general apologetics. And for those who may not be acquainted with what fine tuning is, what could you explain that term?
Well, it's taking a characteristic of, one of the components of the universe and saying, to what degree can we change its value where we would no longer have the possibility for humans existing anywhere, anytime in the universe. And typically, this argument is made on a cosmic scale, where you look at the entirety of the universe and you discover that the mass of the universe must be exquisitely fine tuned to make possible the existence not just of human beings, but even of life itself. And then what I've done in Design to the Core is basically say it's not just the universe as a whole. Our super galaxy cluster must be fine tuned. And the other point is about fine tuning is the uniqueness factor. There are tens of thousands of super galaxy clusters in the universe, but we live in the only one that has the features that permits the existence of life. We live in the only galaxy that permits the existence of life. We live on the only local arm, the only arm of our Milky Way galaxy where life is possible. And you could basically argue at any cosmic size scale and notice that everything seems to be unique. I mean, we astronomers have spent 70 years trying to find a star sufficiently like the sun that it could be a candidate to have a planet orbiting it in which advanced life exists. And we found many stars that are twins of one another, but we've yet to find a star that's a twin of the sun. And if you go to the back of Design to the Core, I show you the luminosity stability of the star that places second to the sun in being most stable. And that second best star is 5 times more unstable than the sun. Only the sun has a luminosity stability to permit civilization to thrive on one of its planets.
So, what was it that made you want to do some more research on the fine tuning argument?
Well, there's a principle you see in Psalms and Job that the more we learn about nature, the more evidence we'll uncover for the supernatural handiwork of God. That's why I've written 5 books over the past 35 years, is basically to show with every month that goes by, new scientific research shows even more evidence than we had before for the supernatural handiwork of God. And what I'm particularly excited about Design to the Core is in the last 3 years, the case for fine tuning to make possible our existence has risen exponentially. And it's risen exponentially on every cosmic size scale. So, people who have read the book tell me every chapter is a mind blower because it's like, look at how much more evidence we have today than we had 3 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I remember looking when I wrote the case for the one true God, and I had a chapter on local fine tuning. I listed maybe about 30 to 35 examples of things that have to be right about the moon and the sun and the earth and the gas giants. And at the end, I in well in the ebook it was a link, but it was just a reference in the paperback version. I said like Dr. Hugh Ross keeps an updated list of these, and currently it's in like the 400s. Like
It's actually above 1,000 now.
yeah, that was back then. It's just the sheer number is just incredible.
Well, just to give you an idea how incredible, when I speak on university campuses to skeptics, I tell them if you're not convinced today, wait 1 month. Because what we've been seeing over the past 30 years is that the case for the God of the Bible, based on fine tuning, rises by about a factor of 1,000 times every single month. I mean, where else can you go in Christian apologetics and get a factor of 1,000 times more evidence in just 30 days?
Yeah, I can't think of any. Um, so in your latest book, uh, Designed to the Core, this is what it looks like for anybody who wants to get a copy. and I'm pretty sure I put a link in the description. If not, I will rectify that. In your latest book, you document a fine tuning for the existence of humans on all cosmic scales for the first time, and you categorize them into 11 areas. Now, obviously, it would be too much of a gargantuan task to list all of them in a 1 hour program, but maybe you could just give a few examples, maybe two or three from like each of those 11 areas.
Well, those 11 chapters are organized where I say, here's the case based on the universe as a whole and the laws of physics. Now let's go down one step and look at the cosmic web. The universe is structured where you have these bubbles of galaxy clusters strung all over the universe. But we live in the only bubble where life is possible. Then you get into that bubble and you discover we live in the only super galaxy cluster. A super galaxy cluster is a cluster of clusters of galaxies. And so I showed just how ours alone has the dozen or so features that must be fine-tuned to make life possible in that super galaxy cluster. Then I dropped down to our galaxy cluster. We live in the Virgo cluster. And then we live in what's called the local group of galaxies that's on the outside edge of the Virgo cluster. And, there's literally millions of galaxy groups in the universe, billions, in fact. And yet we live in the only galaxy group that has the conditions that make possible our existence. And then we move into our Milky Way galaxy. I mean, I have trouble watching the Star Wars movies because they say a galaxy far, far away. Well, we've looked at galaxies far, far away, looked at them up close. None of them have the characteristics. The Milky Way is unique. And you look at all the spiral arms, we live in the only arm of our galaxy where existence is possible. Then you zoom in that arm and you see we live in what's called the local bubble. Inside the local bubble, the local fluff. Inside that local fluff, we see a planetary system. And as you examine our planetary system, you notice every one of the 8 planets must be exquisitely fine-tuned to make our existence possible here on Earth. It's not just planet Earth that's designed, all 8 of the planets in our solar system are fine-tuned, and even the 5 asteroid and comet belts. Our asteroid and comet belts are nothing like what we see orbiting other stars. And then I kind of drill down into the interior of the Earth, look at all of its interior layers, do the same thing with the moon and with the sun, and show in each case they're exquisitely fine-tuned to make possible our existence.
Yeah, I remember. But I remember when I learned that the other planets in our solar system were conducive to life on this planet. I had never heard that before, and like it was like they had to be of the just right size and of the just right distance because they kind of served. I use the analogy in my local fine tuning chapter as like the as like like the planet Earth is like the president, and the 4 gas giants are like the Secret Service members. If somebody shoots a bullet at the president, if an asteroid is coming our way, one of the gas giant planets will get in the way. Their gravity will, that asteroid will get into the gravitational pull of, say, Jupiter or Saturn, and it will hit the gas giant instead, just like a Secret Service member will take a bullet for the president. And without these 4 gas giants, if any of them were a little bit larger or a little bit small, if they were like too small, their gravity wouldn't be strong enough to deflect the asteroids from
Well,
us.
what's
But if
important?
they were too large, then it would have consequences on this planet. And that's just I thought, wow, like you think most people probably just think that those planets are just sitting out there not doing anything, but they actually are very important.
Well, they are in the sense that, yeah, you have to have a stable orbit of the Earth about the sun. And so the other 7 planets have just the right size, just the right mass and orbital features to ensure that our orbit remains in exactly with the right characteristics so that we can thrive. And it's also important that we get the just right delivery of asteroids and comets. And so we need a few coming into the Earth, but obviously you don't want too many, or you don't want them to be too big. And the other 7 planets ensure, and by the way, the moon plays a role as well. The moon has to be fine tuned to ensure we get just the right delivery of asteroids and comets and just the right kind of asteroids coming in to the Earth. So, for example, our planet loses a tiny amount of water to interplanetary space, but that tiny amount we lose is counterbalanced by the tiny amount we gain from small comets that impact the Earth on a daily basis. Comets are 85% frozen water. And so everything is kept in a just right balance. And it's important, too, that we get some of these valuable asteroids colliding with the Earth. So, for example, 80% of the gold and platinum in circulation comes from an asteroid that struck just outside Johannesburg a few 100 million years ago. You don't want them colliding today, but you want them colliding at the just right time so they're not completely eroded away, but sufficient that we can mine them easily and put them into our economy. And, we look at other planetary systems, 80% of them don't have any asteroids or comets at all. And that would be a problem for life. The other 20% have asteroid and comet belts that are 1,000 times bigger than we see in our own solar system, which means the planets in that planetary system would be bombarded by really dangerous comets and asteroids on a frequent basis.
So, what would you say are the odds of all these, you said over 1,000 different life essential parameters coming together uh, under the assumption that this was not designed, that it just happened by chance?
Yeah, if you're assuming that you don't have the God of the Bible performing miracles to make all this possible, the odds of this happening without the intervention of the God of the Bible is so remote. Well, it's less than 1 chance in 10 to the 1600th power. And to give you an analogy for that, that would be equivalent to someone here in California winning the California lottery 200 consecutive times, where they buy just one ticket each time. Or as a mathematician friend of mine put it, it's no different than the probability of winning the California lottery 200 consecutive times where you don't buy any tickets at all.
Yeah, that would be really improbable. Um, and yeah, one chance in 10 to the 1600th power. That's 1600 zeros after a one.
It is another way to put that in perspective. The number of protons and neutrons and electrons in the universe adds up to 10 to the 79. So we're talking about something far more remote than the possibility that you could pick out one of those specially marked particles out of all the particles in the universe, blindfolded.
Yeah, yeah. I like these illustrations because they really drive home the point of the improbability, and it really makes the argument more forceful and persuasive, because these numbers are so huge that without such word pictures they would be impossible to fathom.
Well, a principle we have in physics, it's if you can show that something is less than 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power of happening, you basically can conclude it's impossible. It'll never happen. I mean, there's 1 chance in 10 to the 80th that one of us will be killed by a sudden reversal of the second law of thermodynamics sometime in the next hour. That possibility is so incredibly tiny, we realize it's never happened anytime, anywhere in the entire history and the spatial geography of the universe.
Yeah. But if it does happen, I will be shutting down comment in the comment section because we'll all be dead. um, which of the 11 different areas of fine tuning did you find the most compelling and difficult to refute?
Well, one that was written about a little more than a year ago was the recognition that our sun, as stable as it is, it's the most stable star we see anywhere. Even so, in the first half billion years of its existence, it's pouring out intense particle radiation, gamma ray, X ray, and ultraviolet radiation, and flaring activity at such an intensity that it would have evaporated all of Earth's water and all of Earth's atmosphere into interplanetary space. What prevented that from happening was that you had two rocky planets, the proto-Earth and a body about twice the size of Mars, colliding with one another early in the history of the solar system. And that collision event made the Earth bigger, but it also created a debris cloud that coalesced to make the moon. Consequently, both bodies had very hot cores. Cores so hot that both bodies at that time had a liquid iron core, because all the iron would sink down towards the core. And the two bodies were close enough together at that time that the tidal forces of the moon circulated the liquid iron inside the Earth's core, and the Earth's tidal forces exerted on the moon circulated the liquid iron in the interior of the moon, so that both bodies had a strong magnetosphere. And the two bodies were close enough together at that time that the two magnetospheres coupled. And if it wasn't for those two magnetospheres coupling, the sun would have blasted away all of our water and all of our atmosphere. And the scientists that published this paper concluded it by saying, we discovered another habitability requirement. But it's the most spectacular planetary habitable requirement that's been discovered in the past 30 years. They're basically making a point. There's no possibility for life ever existing on any planet in the universe unless it formed just like the Earth formed as a result of a collision between two rocky bodies at just the right time in a planetary system's history, at just the right distance from its host star, where both bodies wound up with circulating liquid iron cores that produce magnetospheres, where the magnetospheres coupled. It's also crucial that the moon spiral away from the Earth at just the right rate. Because the moon's gravity slows down our rotation rate. And you want the rotation rate, which started off as 2 hours per day, to be slowed down to 24 hours a day at that moment when the sun has maximum luminosity stability. If any of those characteristics or features in the history of our planetary system did not occur, there'd be no possibility for life at any time, anywhere on planet Earth.
Yeah, yeah. The rotation rate of the Earth was one thing I found surprising, because most of us just kind of take it for granted. Most people don't realize how important that is, and I kind of found it amusing, because in this science fiction cartoon called Ben 10, there is a planet with like ice breathing moth people, and it does not rotate at all. There is one side that is completely lit and one side that is completely cold. And I'm like, that planet can't have life. So it kind of made it hard to suspend belief.
A vast majority of rocky planets that we astronomers have discovered outside of our solar system have that feature. They're orbiting so close to their host star that the gravity of that star has caused one side to face the star all the time and the opposite side to be permanently dark. Kind of what happened to our moon. Earth's gravity has slowed down moon's rotation rate, so that one side of the moon always faces us, the other side is always away from us. And yes, if you've got a planet where half the hemisphere is permanently lit and the other half is permanently dark, there's no possibility for life existing on that planet.
So, which do you think it's possible for, say, microscopic life to be found somewhere else in the universe, or is this does this kind of intense all the way down to the very nitty gritty local fine tuning? Does that just have to do with like advanced embodied life like us, or does this rule out any kind of life?
Well, the odds are definitely better for microbial life. I mean, if you go to our website, reasons.org/fine tuning, you see the probability of finding a body anywhere in the universe without divine miraculous intervention that'd be capable of hosting bacteria for, say, a 9 month or 3 month period. That probability is less than 1 chance in 10 to the 350th power. That still rules out that possibility. I mean, it's 350 zeros after the one. But if you want to have plants and animals, that probability becomes much more remote. If you want humans, again, as we mentioned, less than 1 chance in 10 to the 1600th power. So yes, the more advanced the life, the less probable you're going to find a body. But even trying to find a body that can support microbes is absurdly remote. But I would put the probability of finding a planet that can host a microbe for 3 months at a much higher level than finding a planet that can host microbes for 3 billion years. I say that because that's the minimum time it would take microbes to chemically transform a planet so that plants and animals can exist on that planet.
One of the objections that I usually receive from the to the local fine tuning argument, in fact, when I was, no, I don't think it was on the post linking to the stream, but it was on some post about this topic. Dr. Glenn Peoples, he wrote a comment. He was engaging with somebody in the comment section, and he brought up the argument that he thought the cosmic fine tuning was a stronger argument because with some of these conditions, while they might not be conducive to creatures like us, perhaps different kinds of creatures might have evolved that might be able to live in those kinds of environments, like like the moth people I mentioned. They thrived in that environment, but if a human being got in a spaceship and went there, they would die instantly. How do you respond to that kind of
Yeah, that
objection?
was dealt with in the scientific literature about 40 years ago, where people were speculating maybe life doesn't have to be carbon based. Maybe we can make a boron base or silicon base or arsenic base. Those have been the leading candidates. But chemists have weighed in on that and have made the point. If you want to have proteins or the equivalent of proteins, DNA and RNA, I mean, if you're going to have life, you have to have complex molecules. And carbon is the only game in town. Carbon is the only element in the periodic table that has the bonding stability and the bonding complexity to make possible the complex molecules that minimally would be needed to have life. And so life has to be carbon based. And that's really the only assumption I bring in to these remote probabilities that you see on our website and you see in my books. I simply assume wherever life exists in the universe, it's got to be carbon based.
Yeah, and what are some of the issues with non-carbon based life?
Well, silicon is probably the one that's been most speculated about, but the bonds are simply not stable enough. And you can't get the range of multiplicity of molecules based on silicon. Some have argued maybe you can do a little better with boron and arsenic. Well, they're less abundant in the universe, and I do think they're better options than silicon, but they suffer from the same problem. The bonding stability is not adequate, and you don't get the range of complex molecules that you need to make life possible. Nevertheless, we do have some arsenic-based proteins that are in our body. I mean, that's another part of the fine-tuning argument, is there's 22 elements in the periodic table that we call vital poisons. If you got too little in your body, you'll die. If you got too much in your body, you'll also die. So we have to have a fine-tuned quantity of arsenic in our body in order to thrive. By the way, you don't need very much. About 1 part in a million is adequate. If you get it up to 10 parts in a million, you're going to die. So, people have often talked about arsenic poisoning, but you can get silicon poisoning and boron poisoning. And the remarkable thing about our planet Earth is that the elements in the periodic table are all at just the right abundance level for advanced life to be able to thrive on our planet. And if you look at the composition of our planet's crust, you see that those 92 elements are all incredibly anomalous. The only ones that are kind of like the rest of the universe would be magnesium and iron. Everything else is highly anomalous. So, for example, we got 90 times as much titanium as what you see in other rocky planets, 60 times less sulfur. We have 630 times as much thorium, 340 times as much uranium. And it takes that enormous, anomalous abundance of uranium and thorium to provide the interior heat in the Earth to ensure we got long lasting magnetosphere and long lasting plate tectonics, both of which are essential for advanced life.
So another objection to, and this affects both kinds of fine tuning, cosmic and local. It's the the multiverse objection. The atheist says, well, it doesn't matter how improbable it is. It doesn't, you can make the numbers as big as you want, but there's an infinite number of universes out there. And so the odds that one of them will have all the cosmic parameters and all the local parameters just right, it's going to happen. In fact, it might happen a whole bunch of times. How do you respond to that kind of argument?
Well, I've been speaking on the fine tuning argument for God since the 1970s. And I remember in the 1980s telling university audiences, a time will come when the scientific evidence for fine tuning to make our existence possible will become so pervasive and so overwhelming that atheists will have nowhere else to go but to hypothesize there's an infinite number of universes where they're all different from one another, and we live in the one lucky universe by pure chance. But I remember telling audiences back then, whenever a non-theist has to appeal to infinity, he's basically saying, I've got no case. And the thing about infinity is it's more than just infinity. Infinity plus infinity equals infinity. Infinity times infinity equals infinity. Infinity to the infinity power equals infinity. And it was Leonard Susskind, who was an atheist, I think he's now an agnostic, who said, we atheists have got to stop using the multiverse. It's a bad argument. It explains everything. An argument that explains everything explains nothing. Now, I notice you got the 4th edition of The Creator and the Cosmos. You'll see 5 pages there on the multiverse, where I give an analogy to make Leonard Susskind's point. If you have a true infinity of universes, that they're all different from one another, you'll have an infinite number of planets, just like planet Earth. And on that infinite number of planet Earths, you're going to have an infinite variety of birch tree species. And birch trees peel thin white pieces of bark. But if you've got an infinite variety of birch tree species, one of those species will peel thin white pieces of bark that are perfectly rectangular that measure 8.5 by 11 inches. And these pieces of thin white bark will fall on soils with random chemicals in them that will imprint every photograph, every diagram, every table, every equation, every paragraph, and every scientific paper that's ever been written. And so you look at the scientific literature at those tens of millions of scientific research papers and say, they weren't written by scientists, the multiverse did it. So the whole point is, if you're going to appeal to the multiverse to get rid of God's design, you simultaneously get rid of all designs, and you're basically saying, we human beings don't have a mind, we're not rational, we're not logical, we're not capable of writing a scientific research paper than a rock. But no scientist believes that. No human believes that.
Yeah, and in my chapter on cosmic fine tuning, I have several points against the multiverse, and that's one of them. And one of the illustrations I used was I have a cat. She's asleep in the corner over there. I said, What if you could say every single blog post on cerebralfaith.net, I think it was .blogspot.com back then, was written because my cat was chasing a mouse, and she just happened. I just happened to have a word processor open, and they just ran back and forth until all of them was written, and they also happened to just click the right keys in order to upload them to a website. Like that can happen if you have an infinite number of universes and an infinite number of jelly beans chasing mice.
Well,
But
there's a positive way to frame this argument too. If you're going to claim that an infinite number of universes explains all these extraordinarily fine-tuned features, then as we scientists learn more and more about the universe, that fine-tuning evidence should plateau and then begin to decline. But if we're really talking about the God of the Bible performing miracles to manifest this fine-tuned design, then the more we learn about science, the greater the fine-tuning evidence will accumulate. And so I say to the people who are promoting the multiverse as an argument against God, let's put this to the test. Let's see if the fine tuning case for us humans existing in this universe rises with respect to time, or will it plateau, flatten off, and then decline? And the evidence of the past 60 years is it's been going up exponentially month by month by month by month. We've never seen it plateau. And hey, if you don't believe this, test it for another month or two and see if it doesn't continue. So that's a positive way to respond to the multiverse argument against the God of the Bible.
yeah, yeah. And what one of the but for those here's an interesting fact, in case people didn't know, what the negative version of the argument that Ross and I both used, his with the tree bark and mine with the cat and a few other illustrations. It's called reductio ad absurdum. It's when you take an argument and you use the same logic in another context and show that it leads to absurd conclusions. Like nobody appeals to the multiverse to explain anything else except for cosmic fine tuning. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. It's because
Yeah, you're basically exposing the philosophical inconsistency of the
it's
argument.
theologically convenient to do that. Because the fact that I am the product of my blog posts, or the fact that a criminal is the reason why there's a fingerprint on a weapon, that doesn't bring with it any worldview implications.
Right.
So probably the main objection to the local fine tuning argument that I see is just the massiveness, and you've already pretty much addressed this. But like, if somebody brought this objection up in, like, say, an elevator, and you had to explain why the size of the universe is not sufficient to guarantee that all of these things would come together, how would
Well,
you?
I would first tell them that, the size of the universe and the mass of the universe are part of the fine tuning argument. Make the universe the tiniest bit more massive, and then stars would quickly fuse all the hydrogen and helium in the universe into elements heavier than iron. And if all you got are elements as heavy as iron or heavier, you've got no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, and no possibility for life. On the other hand, make the universe the tiniest bit less massive, and then the only elements that would ever exist in the history of the universe would be hydrogen and helium. That would make passing a chemistry class easy, but once again, there'd be no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, and no possibility for life. And then how far apart the stars are, so how big the universe must be, that has to be carefully fine-tuned to make possible planets on which life exists. These are topics I covered in why the universe is the way it is. But I think you can also couple that and say the universe has to be exactly a particular age, size, and mass in order for it to be possible, not only for physical observers to exist, but those physical observers to be able to observe the entire history of the universe. To give you an example, if we were put here any earlier in cosmic history or any later, we'd only be seeing part of the past history of the universe. As it is, we're able to see 100% of the past history of the universe. And I could actually show you, you'll see this in some of my books, what the universe looks like when it's 100 billionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second old. And it's our ability to observe the universe being created. And I'm not saying inferred. We directly observe the cosmic creation event. And that's where we get some of our most compelling, rigorous scientific evidence for the God of the Bible, which tells me somebody wanted us to be able to read the history book of the universe.
Yeah, that's what Jay
Jay Richards and Guillermo Gonzalez.
Jay Richard and
Right.
Guillermo Gonzalez. They that was one the primary thing they talked about in their book, The Privileged Planet. It wasn't just, oh, look at how finely tuned our world is, but also it's finely tuned in such a way that it's conducive to discovery. There are some.
Well, that argument's been extended. For example, you need the laws of physics to be complex enough that allows for the existence of life, but simple enough where observers could actually discover and understand those laws of physics. And the difference between the two is a knife edge. And so the simplicity you need and the complexity you need to make both of those things possible, they touch. There's no gap between them.
Now, what would you say that the evidence of design reveals about God's character?
Well, I wrote Design to the Core to make the point that the universe is designed not just to permit our existence, but to allow for us to be redeemed from our sin and evil. And this reveals the character of the Creator. What I find unique about Christianity, it's a two creation model. God creates his universe to be a tool in God's hands to efficiently and rapidly eradicate all evil and suffering. But once that is achieved, the Bible tells us God will replace his universe with a brand new creation. And in that creation, we're going to have different laws of physics, different dimensions. It's going to be so wonderful that not one human being can imagine how great and wonderful and rewarding and good it will be.
Yeah, amen. And that reminds me of somebody I talked to on social media a while back, and he seemed to be distraught. He didn't think that science would be possible in the new heavens and the new earth. And I responded, why think that? Given that there will be like different physics and stuff, so some things we might have to start from ground one, but we've got all eternity to figure it out.
Well, the angelic realm is ruled by different laws of physics and the different dimensions. And so there's science there. There's science in our creation. There'll be science in the new creation. But I think it's going to be a lot more complex than we see in our present creation.
Yeah. I mean, it would have to be governed by different laws if it was going to last forever, because we know the one we're living in now is headed towards heat death. So
Well, it tells us explicitly in Revelation 21, in the new creation, there's no death, there's no decay. It describes this new Jerusalem with corners on it, residing on a new earth. It gives us dimensions for that new Jerusalem. And those dimensions, by a wide margin, violate the law of gravity, which tells us there's no gravity in the new creation. There's light in the new creation, but there's no shadows or darkness. So it's not electromagnetic radiation. It's a completely different kind of light. In fact, we're told everything will glow with light in the new creation. So yeah, it's going to be a cosmos where there won't be gravity, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, or the strong and weak nuclear forces. All those laws of physics are put into place to be effective tools to eradicate evil and suffering. And because of that, we have decay and we have death. But once evil is eradicated, those laws no longer need to be in effect.
What do you hope people will gain by reading this book?
Well, I hope they'll get a sense of just God's power, his care, and his love for us human beings, and that they'll be motivated to discover, okay, there's overwhelming case here that it's been exquisitely fine-tuned to make our redemption possible. I want to know more about that redemptive plan. I mean, nature reveals that there is a plan for our redemption. The Bible gives us the specifics. I mean, the mission of Reasons to Believe is to use the book of nature to bring people to the book of Scripture and into a relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's my prayer, what will happen when people read Design to the Core.
Amen. I hope that happens too. Um, well, that's all the questions I have. Thank you for coming on the program, Dr. Ross. I'm sorry again that we were an hour late. That's probably why we didn't have any live action, live chat comments. But it was an enjoyable conversation, and this is one of my favorite topics in the realm of natural theology.
Well, I really appreciate the questions you asked. Thank you.
And for those watching, you can see the book right here. It's Designed to the Core by Hugh Ross. It is available in paperback and Kindle, and there's also an audiobook edition on Audible. And you can just click the link in the description below.
Yeah, reasons.org. That's the website.
Yeah. Well, that will wrap it up this year for Cerebral Faith Live. So normally this is around the time I would say come back next week, but this, I guess I should say come back next May, because and next May, like I said, I'm going to be having this whole, course on the Kalam cosmological argument. I'm going to have a PowerPoint presentation on cosmic and local fine-tuning, the moral argument, the ontological argument, gospel reliability, the problem of evil, minimal facts. It's going to be chock full of content, and it's primarily for YouTube purpose. I've already covered these extensively on the audio podcast, but some of the earliest videos I've made on YouTube are just kind of poorly edited and cringeworthy. So I just kind of like to redo some of those again. And hopefully when May comes, you will show up and leave some good questions. I really appreciate it if you brought some of your skeptical friends and have them tune in. But thank you for watching Cerebral Faith Live. And if you've listened to this on the audio version, thank you for listening to the Cerebral Faith podcast. Peace out. Oh, by the way, before I go, I need to give a shout out to my patrons. Let me just pull that up right quick. Because I don't want to leave anybody out. So I just want to bring up the list of names here. Marcy Schlaufman, Daniel C. Holstein, David Shannon, Red Blade Flame, Steel Cat, Slam RN, Andrew Melnick, Nathan Hamilton, Jordan Hampton, Brandon Whitaker, and David Parrish. And if you'd like to become a patron of Cerebral Faith, go to the link down below here, www.patreon.com/Cerebral Faith. Peace out, God bless, and keep using the brains that God gave you.